What's going on, guys, and welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the premiere of WWE Ruthless Aggression, or better known as Ruthless Aggression. I know that's a terrible Vince McMahon impersonation, but nonetheless, this is the pilot episode of the show. It's time to shake things up is the name of Season 1, Episode 1 here. So this went up on the WWE Network on Sunday. They already put up Episode 2. I have not had a chance to watch that one yet. Probably won't until tomorrow when I break it down for you here on the channel. That's, I think, focusing on John Cena. But yeah, this is basically the introduction to the show. I've been looking forward to this for a while now. I first saw the promo for it a few weeks ago, and it went up on Sunday. I thought we would have to wait a little longer for it, but apparently not. And I love the idea of this show because I thought that Monday Night War show they did years ago, back in 2014, it was right after the network launched. Maybe in August of 2014 they started the show, and it went on for many, many months. They did a lot of episodes of that Monday Night War show, and it was great. I have had yet to go back and rewatch that. I want to kind of break it down here for the channel at some point for Network and Chill. But in the meantime, we have the Ruthless Aggression show where it kind of picks up where that show left off in the end of the Monday Night War, transitioning into that period of what's next, the Ruthless Aggression era, as it came to be known as in 2002 and beyond. So to kick it off here, we get some background. Again, a lot of this has to do with the Monday Night War show, so if you didn't see that show, this is kind of catching you up to speed here. So Raw, originally a very dominant wrestling show throughout the 1990s, going into the late 90s, Ted Turner decided that he wanted to compete with WWE with WCW. And they gave WWE legitimate competition. They kicked WWE's ass in the ratings with Nitro over Raw for 83 weeks. And it forced WWE to try something new, try out new stars, storylines, an all-new direction and attitude, no pun intended, and vibe for the WWE programming, which led to the Monday Night War. That ultimately led to doom for WCW. Now, again, they don't get into specifics as to what led to the doom, the demise of WCW. You're going to have to rewatch the Monday Night War show to get that, all those details and whatnot. But it's been pretty well established at this point what led to the closure of WCW in 2001. A lot of dumb decisions made, not just creatively, but business-wise and stuff like that. So anyway, March of 2001, WWE buys them out, and now they're completely dominant. They are the single most dominant wrestling company in all of wrestling, is WWE. And then it quickly turned from a sense of jubilation and excitement and happiness that, hey, we won the war, to what's next? Where do we go from here? Because all the buzz that the two shows were creating against each other, that being Nitro and Monday Night Monday Night Raw, were gone. That buzz was gone. Because now it's just WWE. And any fans that were from WCW that didn't want to watch WWE didn't automatically turn over, and Raw became the most watched it ever was. If anything, interest in the product went down. Because that competition, as Brian Gewirtz, we hear from him a lot on this show, which I thought was awesome. I don't think I've heard from him at all. I don't know if he was a part of that Monday Night War show years ago. And I don't think he started writing for WWE. I thought until 2002. I think it was a lot earlier than that because he worked with The Rock. Maybe it was the Attitude Era, but they put on his nameplate he wrote Raw from 02 to 2012, unless I'm mistaken. But I'm pretty sure he was there in the Attitude Era. Anyway, I don't think he was there on the Monday Night War show years ago, but they did bring him in for this, which was cool. But anyway, in storyline, they had Shane McMahon buy WCW, and I don't know if the invasion was ever covered in that Monday Night War show. I feel like it was, but I'm not 100% sure. But I'm glad they touch on it here because it was a fucking disaster, and they admit as such here in this documentary. Brian Gewirtz said the invasion was the most anticipated angle in WWE history. And from Becky Lynch's standpoint as a fan, it was like discovering a whole new well of talent. Ricochet, growing up watching WWE, said that he was excited for it. Expectations, according to Brian Gewirtz, and he's not wrong here, were super high, but those expectations weren't met because they didn't pick up all the contracts. They picked up some pretty cool contracts, like for Booker T and DDP and some notable names to an extent, but not the Stings, not the Goldbergs, the Hulk Hogans, the NWO on the whole, the Ric Flairs, the Scott Steiners, and none of those people came in from the get-go. It was mostly, you could call DDP and Booker T A- level stars. I would say they're more like B+, because they're great, but they're not top-tier talent. Everyone else, Sean Stasiak, fucking Chuck Palumbo, Mark Jindrak, people like that were complete busts. They were all not ready for that spot. And again, they admit as much here on this show. They were like, listen, we were not ready for that spotlight, which is why we were in WCW when we were, because we weren't ready for the WWE spotlight, and it really cost us in the end. That new talent, according to Bruce Pritchard, who we also hear a lot from on this show, and as he would know, I mean, he was there at the time. He was a pretty influential force behind the scenes on creative and stuff like that. He said that new talent that came in wanted to succeed. They were adamant, they had that fire about them, but they just weren't top stars. They were years away, he said, from ever being ready. We actually hear from Mark Jindrak on this episode, which I thought was really, really cool. He looks great. I mean, I haven't seen the guy in over a fucking decade and a half since he was last on WWE TV. Really cool to see him here, though. But yeah, even he was like, listen, we were not ready. We weren't that good. So it really was not a great time for us to be brought in and be presented in storyline as threats to people like The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Undertaker. They weren't believable to take out WWE's top stars. And WWE talent really didn't love this acquisition of WCW either, because they were wondering, like, how is this going to affect me? How is this acquisition going to affect my TV time? Because you're bringing in 30 new people all at once. You're not getting rid of anybody. So what does this mean for me? A lot of the WWE talent spent fucking years feuding with these people. Now they're expected to just be friendly with them in the same locker room. Like, get the fuck out of here. Literally, WWE, I'm sure, was saying to WCW, like, I'm not really sure how that went. I can only imagine. They didn't really get into that here, but they were talking more about how it was going to affect them from a business standpoint in terms of, like, is my TV time going to be curtailed? Like, what's going to happen here? It's like if WWE bought AEW tomorrow. What are you going to do with all the talent? WWE, as it is, already has too much talent. What does that mean for all these other people they're bringing in and hoarding the talent? They're going to get even less TV time that they already get as it is, you know? So they had that one night on Raw in July of 2001 where it turned to Monday Night Nitro, WCW for a night. I guess it was WWE's way of experimenting, testing the waters for a second WCW show. Because I think, as the legend goes, which I'm sure this has been confirmed by various people, that SmackDown, which was already on the air at that point, but not like, a second brand or whatever, it was just another WWE show. That was going to be the WWE show, and then the Monday night show, Raw, was going to become Nitro, and that was going to be the WCW show. But they had that one episode of Nitro, or Raw that turned into Nitro, rather, in July of 2001. It was a complete fucking bust. They had that Booker T. Buff Bagwell main event for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, and the crowd shit all over. They literally killed it within minutes. The match wasn't good anyway, but the crowd did it no favors. And it was because of that crowd that they never went with that idea of making WCW its own brand, because the WWE fans were never going to accept it. And all the WCW fans that were watching previously, that wasn't going to bring them back. They had no interest in seeing. They didn't really talk about this here, but those WCW fans had no interest, I'm sure. I mean, I wasn't one of them, in seeing the WCW talent they kind of grew up watching and loving and stuff like that being booked by WWE people. They just lost interest and stopped watching wrestling altogether. I do know people. I had cousins that are a lot older than me that were watching in the Monday Night War times, and they were big WCW fans. They fucking owned the, I still play it to this day because the N64 that I have still works. The NWO WCW Revenge game for the N64. They were big WCW fans. After the Monday Night War was over and they kind of grew up, they stopped watching because they didn't really care about what WWE was doing at that point. So that was a real thing, and those WCW fans never came back. And WWE tried everything to bring those people back by bringing in Ric Flair and Steiner and Hogan and the NWO and Goldberg and bringing Goldberg back again a couple years ago. But just nothing ever worked. So anyway, Kevin Owens, we hear from him, who was a big WWE fan growing up. Even he said, listen, I didn't know Buff Bagwell, no offense to him, I didn't know him, and I didn't care. He just, to me, did not feel like as big of a star as The Rock or Stone Cold Steve Austin or Taker, etc., etc. So finally, WCW was laid to rest for good by November of 2001 after the Invasion angle ran its course, which it did long before that, but they finally got to the conclusion of it that November at the Survivor Series pay-per-view, and that was it for WCW. They never brought it back. They never resurrected it. They did all these one-night stand pay-per-views for ECW in the years that followed. They brought that back as a third brand in 2006. Not WCW. We have yet to have any sort of WCW reunion show, and a lot of those people are in WWE today, so I'm not really sure that would work as well. But that was it for WCW. So then we transition into OVW, talk about the all-new developmental territory for WWE, headed by one Jim Cornette, who was all over this thing as well, which I thought was cool. Say what you will about Jim Cornette and all the controversy surrounding him in recent months with the whole NWA thing and whatever, but you can't do a documentary on the Ruthless Aggression era without Jim Cornette. He was every bit as responsible in creating this talent as anybody, so it was cool to hear from him. He said the idea there in creating a developmental territory for WWE was to elevate younger talent. People like John Cena, people like Randy Orton, Brock Lesnar, Batista, Shelton Benjamin. But it was going to take time to develop those stars, though. They couldn't be brought up in a fucking day. It's like having, there's a lot of good talent right now in NXT, but it's like calling up or old name was Reina, Raquel Gonzalez. She's a fresh face. Like, for example, the women's divisions on Raw and SmackDown right now need a makeover. They're just, they have talent, but they need more talent, They can't call up the entire NXT women's division at one time. I guess they kind of did a couple years ago with Becky and Sasha and Charlotte, which, if you remember, though, didn't get off to the strongest start because they had a too much talent almost at that point, and then you can't push everyone at once. So it really took time for Sasha to find her footing. Becky was an afterthought for the longest time. So it's not, in theory, it might sound cooler than it actually is in execution. So anyway, they knew they had to take their time with those stars and developing them into becoming household names. So in the meantime, they kind of killed time by having Ric Flair finally come in. Those people finally became free agents. So they brought in Ric Flair, had him return to WWE for the first time in like 8 years or so, became Vince's partner in storyline, his business partner. And that led to WCW talent finally being brought in, including the NWO in 2002. And a lot of people thought, okay, these fantasy matches can finally happen, including The Rock and Hulk Hogan, which we got at WrestleMania 18, which was, as a match, not great, but in terms of electricity and crowd atmosphere, that whole thing was absolutely amazing. And it's a match and no one will ever forget. But you still needed those cornerstones of WWE, so enter Triple H and The Undertaker. Again, say what you will about Triple H and his reign of terror. I'm not even really sure they'll discuss that here on this show. But he was a cornerstone of WWE for that entire period, even throughout the Attitude Era. I think Triple H, pre-quad injury, was probably the best he ever was in the ring. 2000 was his fucking year. When Stone Cold was out, and The Rock had a great 2002, but Triple H, man, had a phenomenal 2000. That WrestleMania 2000 main event wasn't great, but the matches he had that year with Mick Foley, for starters, at the beginning of the year was amazing. The Armageddon Hell in the Cell match later on in the year was awesome. I think Kurt Angle won that one. But he had a lot of great matches that year. The matches with Stone Cold the following year in 2001 were fucking great. The Undertaker match at WrestleMania 17 was fucking great. He was a cornerstone of the product for a long time there and still was years later. And The Undertaker, too, I think if you could point to Cena, Batista, Orton as being the faces of the Ruthless Aggression era. But what really carried WWE into that new era was Triple H and The Undertaker. And then you had Kurt Angle, and he kind of came into his own. But it was really on top consistently, Taker and Triple H. And JBL, we also hear from him. He wasn't a top guy at that point, but he was like, listen, people want to be on top when business is going well. But when business is bad, you don't want to be on top because those are the people that get blamed for business being bad. But Triple H and Taker, he says, were the workhorses consistently night in, night out. You had Kurt Angle step up, and he was kind of a big star around that point, they said. But creatively, the product was still on autopilot. And Brian Gewirtz explains that, I thought this was fascinating because it's true. And a lot of the stuff they say here is absolutely applicable to today's product too. Not that this is 100% accurate today, but there's definitely a semblance of it where they were trying too hard to be edgy. They weren't organically creating that aggression, again, for lack of a better term here, or the attitude, I guess I should say, that they had in the Attitude Era. That was organic. Not everyone's a fan of the Attitude Era. I know I'm not the biggest fan of that era, but it was organic, if nothing else. In that period from like 01 to early 02, before the Ruthless Aggression era really kicked off, none of the shit they were doing at that point with like Billy and Chuck and a lot of the other dumb stuff they were doing, like the fucking Katie Vick shit, like they didn't mention that here, but I'm sure that's what they were alluding to because that was also in 2002. A lot of this overlaps because that did happen, post John Cena debut and stuff like that. So they were doing a lot of questionable shit even after the brand split started again, or really started for the first time. They were like, listen, this is way too edgy. Like, we're trying too hard here to create something that just is not edgy. And even Bruce Pritchard said that force feeding that we were doing at that point led to overall decline in the interest from fans in the product. And that there just wasn't that same drive to be the best that there was before because there was zero competition. They were just kind of phoning it in. So that led to the idea of the roster being split in half. They had way too many people. So after WrestleMania 18, they decided to cut the roster in half. And the idea was, listen, if we have no competition, fuck it, we'll just compete with ourselves. So they knew, it's interesting they admit this, that they knew the ratings would go down. I mean, obviously, The Rock wasn't around. Stone Cold Steve Austin kind of, was phased out by mid-02, and he was done by 03, for good in the ring anyway. I mean, he remained on TV as an authority figure. But beyond that, they were not building around him as the guy anymore because they couldn't because he was gone, and then he was hurt, and then he retired, So they knew the ratings would go down, but they knew if they continued on the same path that they were going, they would have no new stars, and the product would just fucking die. So they had to create new stars slowly but surely. Again, this is absolutely applicable, again, to today's product. I compare this to, on a smaller scale, to today's Raw, where when they brought back the draft and the brand split and shit, a couple months ago with the draft on Fox, and on the subsequent Raw, they were doing squash matches on Raw for months. But it paid off because they got Andrade over. He's the new United States champion. It got McIntyre over. He just won the Royal Rumble. Buddy Murphy, got him over. He's one half of the new Raw Tag Team Champions as part of this top heel faction on the show. That shit paid off. I mean, it was on a much smaller scale, granted, but they knew in the beginning that the Raw shows would not be great, but it paid off in the end per Paul Heyman's, creative vision for the show, which I think is great. So anyway, going back to the Ruthless Aggression era, episode 1 doc here, Bruce Pritchard said in regards to the draft that only maybe one or two top talents knew where they were going. Everyone else had zero clue. Like, no one wanted to see the Dudleys on their own. They admitted that was a dumb decision, but Vince wanted to create this uncertain feeling backstage, like, oh, do you know what show you're on? Or are we going to be separated? Blah, blah, blah. Like, a lot of the talent was pissed off because they didn't want to be separated. They didn't want to be on separate shows or be on that show or that show. So initially, they were kind of mad about the whole thing, and they still do that today. There's still a lot of shit they do in WWE today, which as a fan, I like to know. I like to know I would rather not know, of what's about to happen, but the talent should probably be clued in. And there's a lot of times where they don't know, and they keep them in the dark, which is so stupid. Don't fucking work the boys and girls in the back. I think that's just dumb. But anyway, there was a lot of skepticism, according to Owens, about how much competition there would really be. It was cool. It was a cool concept in theory, but it's still the same company, which again goes for the same thing today. Raw and SmackDown, two totally different shows. How much competition is there really going to be when it's the same company, And it didn't help that they lost two of their top stars, that being The Rock, when he transitioned into Hollywood. And Adam Cole even said he was worried. A young Adam Cole said that he was very worried because Rock was a pillar of the company for so long, according to Kofi Kingston, and he's right. And then Stone Cold Steve Austin, losing him was a huge hit because he hated the direction the company was going at the time. It was right after the Attitude Era ended, and he was kind of a regular on Raw. They weren't doing a ton with him. He had that not awful, but like the subpar WrestleMania match with Scott Hall. And more often than not, the question was, like, what are we going to have Austin do to wreak havoc this week, to just raise hell? And most of the time, when they posed the question of, hey, Austin, do you want to do this? He was like, no. Like, I'm doing the same shit every week. I don't like this. It's stupid. And he would voice his opinion more often than not. And I think it's a balance of both. Like, we're both parties here were in the wrong, where WWE was absolutely booking him to do the same shit every week, and they should be blamed for that. But Austin was also being unprofessional and just being like, no, this is stupid. Like, let's do something else. I mean, I don't know if he was exactly posing. I mean, I'm not the guy. I wasn't there. I don't know. But I feel like he wasn't offering an alternative to do something else, which is where the whole issue came in of him not wanting the job to Brock Lesnar. So Lesnar arrives on Raw from OVW right in early 2002, right after WrestleMania. The idea was to have Austin lose to Brock Lesnar in a King of the Ring qualifying match. Austin fucking hated it. I think it was Brian Gewirtz who either came up with the idea or Pritchard did, whatever. They pitched it to McMahon. He loved the idea because his idea was like, oh, when we can do the match a couple years from now at WrestleMania, no one's going to remember when we did this on Raw as a throwaway match, of course. Like, hey, we'll make money on it at Mania down the road. No one will remember this 3 years from now. That's where you're wrong, Vince, because wrestling fans remember everything. So never throw away. I mean, this was a dumb idea. It was stupid. Let's face it. It was fucking dumb to do Austin and Lesnar on Raw as a fucking King of the Ring qualifier with zero hype or build in advance. It was being thrown onto Raw as a fucking match to do in the King of the Ring qualifier as a part of the tournament. That's it. It made no business sense to Austin. It made no business sense to anyone outside of Vince or really anyone else in the company because creative apparently thought it was a good idea. And when Jim Ross told him of these plans over the phone, he was like, listen, really, that's what we're doing? If we are, then I'm out of here. I'm going home. So again, it goes both ways. It was a dumb idea, but should have Stone Cold left the building that night and just gone home? Probably not. And they even said that I think Brian Gewirtz or Pritchard maybe had said, listen, he didn't even give Vince a chance to go to the arena and work something else out as opposed to doing what they originally planned on. Yeah, he said the idea was shit, which is one thing, but then to go home and not even appear on the show, that's not ideal. So he just booked a flight home for himself and his wife, Deborah, who I think was still working with WWE at that point. I mean, she must have. And they just went home. So Vince was pissed, obviously. As Brian Gewirtz said, he really kind of, emphasized how angry Vince was in that moment coming off of that news that he wasn't even there. Stone Cold wasn't even in the arena. So, because he wasn't going to be in Raw that night. Anyway, so going back to my notes here, Bruce Pritchard even admits that, listen, cooler heads probably could have prevailed, but when Vince was asked soon after by Kevin Kelly, of all people, actually, in the Bite This show, how are things doing in the WWE? Attendance isn't great. Ratings aren't great. What's your thoughts on the whole thing? He said, hey, listen, we're in a state of flux right now. I really don't know what's going on. We're losing our top stars. We're in the process of rebuilding. But he did say in that same interview that he felt an attitudinal wave, as he called it, would soon change things in the WWE. It was just a gut feeling he had, and in the end it paid off. Not immediately, but the idea was to create healthy competition amongst ourselves with Raw and with SmackDown, which is exactly what they did. Both brands were fighting to have better numbers on like house shows and stuff like that. It paid off, and it did over time. It became this all-new era in WWE, that being the Ruthless Aggression era. And it was kind of rung in by the WWE the WWF becoming WWE. Hulk Hogan said he didn't think it would work. He thought it was stupid. But in the end, it did, and now everyone knows it as WWE. And there's still a lot of people that call it WWF, but it's been WWE for so long. I think a lot of people have kind of had it ingrained in their brains that it's WWE, no longer WWF. That's the fucking Panda Company, not wrestling. So anyway, the brand split started to pay off, and again, it created that healthy competition. Both brands fighting to have better numbers on house shows and the ratings and stuff like that. And it was designed, the brand split was, to get those lesser stars over. People like Rob Van Dam, people like Eddie Guerrero, people like Jeff Hardy, people that had a lot of potential that would not be getting those same opportunities without the brand split. And I still say this to this day, when people poop on the idea of a brand split, and if it's not done right, I agree it can be shit. Because they fucking mix and match the brands anyway. But I will stand by this till the day I die. The thing with Raw and with SmackDown and the brand split, it works if done right. If not, it's a mess. But I would prefer a messy brand split, which is kind of what we have now. They're sticking to it for the most part. Now, it's only been a couple months, I guess. I would prefer that over the wild card rule or having people appear on all the shows. Because that way no one gets over. It's the same people on every fucking show. I go back to 2015. Those shows were terrible back in 2015, Raw and SmackDown were. Because it was Roman Reigns in every fucking show. It was Sheamus in every fucking show. It was all the same people on both brands every week, and nobody got over. But because of the brand split, AJ Styles became a top name. Becky Lynch became a top name. Kofi Kingston recently became a top name. You had a lot of fresh faces in the main event scene, and some people didn't exactly work out, people like Jinder Mahal. But for the most part, I think it's created a lot more stars that you wouldn't have had if you still had, one brand between the two shows, if that makes sense. If you didn't have distinct rosters between Raw and with SmackDown. So the goal was always with this brand split that was to create new stars, and it did. But at the same time, at the end of the day, they didn't have the guy. They didn't have one person to build around because Austin was gone. This was right after Stone Cold took off, so they didn't have the guy anymore. So Stone Cold took off. Rock transitioned into Hollywood. They needed a new top guy. Enter John Cena. Vince had sent the message in his promos on Raw saying, listen, we need someone to step up and become that new number one. Step up and take it is what Pritchard said, I think. And then Cena debuted. Now, Pritchard made it sound like, oh, this isn't a case of us creating a star. It's someone wanting to step up and say, hey, I can be the guy, which is fucking bullshit. It's absolute bullshit because everyone wants to be the top guy. That's such a dumb thing to say. Of this whole documentary, which I thought was great, up until this point, I thought that was such a silly thing to say because I'm sure not everyone in the back at that point was competent or rather content with their spot in the company. Everyone wanted to be that top guy. I'm sure fucking Hurricane wanted to be the top guy on Raw, but that's just not his role. I'm sure John Cena didn't say, hey, I'm going to be the guy. I'm going to be WWE champion 3 years from now. I'm sure everyone at that point in that company was ready to be the guy. Booker T was ready to be the guy. He seemed to be the person they were building around, and he could have been that guy if they didn't book him into an oblivion and have him lose to fucking Triple H at WrestleMania 19 in one of the worst booking decisions this company ever made. Rob Van Dam also could have been that guy if they didn't squander his momentum early on. Yeah, they finally put the belt on him like 4 or 5 years later, but by that point, it was too late, and he fucked up his own push with the drug shit and the whatever. But, I mean, early on, though, they didn't fully capitalize on him as the guy because of booking decisions. So this idea like, he didn't have anyone stepping up, and anyone could have stepped up, and they're really blending the work and the shoot aspect of this. They're like, oh, John Cena stepped up. He was ready to be the guy. Get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. Like, obviously, Cena paid off, but it wasn't because, hey, I'm stepping up to be the guy and no one else will. Get the fuck out of here with that nonsense. Other than that, though, I thought this was great. And that's a great transition, a great segue into the next episode focusing on John Cena. By the time you listen to this, you probably have already seen it. It went up earlier today, I think, on the network, early Monday morning. But I will be watching that probably not today, but tomorrow. And I'm not going to review it until tomorrow anyway, so it works out. But yeah, this will become a new thing here on Network and Chill every Monday. New Ruthless Aggression era attitude episodes. Not attitude. Ruthless Aggression episode reviews here on Network and Chill. I think the new plan is to have a new episode up every Monday morning. I think is when they're being uploaded. They're not even waiting until after Raw, which is cool. So if I can watch the Monday and then review it soon after here for the channel before Raw goes up or airs or whatever, that's even better. So yeah, hopefully that'll be the plan moving forward, and you can expect all new Ruthless Aggression era, episode reviews right here on WWE Network and Chill every Monday. We're going to have a second one up tomorrow because they put up 2 episodes this week, one on Sunday, one on Monday, so the reviews are going up today and tomorrow. So have that to look forward to tomorrow here on the channel, and all the other content going up here daily, every day on the channel. I think we've uploaded the video, at least one video a day every day since the beginning of the year. So my new goal, which was kind of the goal at the beginning of the year, was to upload at least one video a day, every day. If it's not original content, then at least it's something. Throughout 2020 and so far, we're well on our way to completing that goal. So I know it's only February, but fingers crossed. Anyway, guys, be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content. We'll be back tomorrow with my review of Season 1, Episode 2 of WWE Ruthless Aggression, or Ruthless Aggression. Again, terrible impersonation. I apologize. And I'll catch you tomorrow right here on the channel, guys. Have a great one. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.